My name is Dr. Howell, and I am so excited that you have chosen to read my book this semester, Raised Up Down Yonder. I'm excited that Professor Poole has invited me to not only tape this short introduction to what anthropology is all about, but to spend a little time dialoguing with each of you this semester as you read my book and you're exposed to the ideas therein, and perhaps you have additional questions. But right now what I'm going to do is just give you a little bit of a background about what anthropology is so that you can have a sense of how to contextualize what it is that you're reading, since many of you, I understand, are not anthropology majors and perhaps have never even taken an anthropology class. So the first question is, what is anthropology actually? Anthropology is the study of man in its full components. We say anthropology is a holistic discipline, and it would differ from disciplines like sociology and psychology in that anthropologists look at the whole measure of man altogether. And we do that specifically through 5 subfields. First, anthropologists use language. There's linguistic anthropology that is interested in how language is part of how we live our everyday lives. We have anthropologists that just literally document language, as well as those that look at how we differ our language patterns depending on things like our race, our gender, our region, our culture, and how we code switch in and out of speaking certain ways around certain people, and in different domains we speak a different way. So that's linguistic anthropology. The second of the 5 subfields is archaeology, and these are in no particular order. Archaeology is the study of the human past through material remains. So archaeologists look at fossils and plant remains and soil stains and all the things that we could use to understand what life was like for humans in the recent past and in the very distant past, going back millions of years to our human ancestors. The third of the subfields of anthropology is biological or physical anthropology. Biological or physical anthropologists look at the makeup of humans from a biological and genetic perspective to understand what we share with other primates that like ourselves, but then just to also understand things like patterns of disease and global dimensions of height and weight and hair color and all kinds of interesting things. And then fourth is cultural anthropology, and I am a cultural anthropologist, so this is the most special to me, and it's oftentimes what students associate with the term anthropology. Cultural anthropologists study the cultures of people around the world contemporarily. So right now, what are anthropologists doing? They're in communities all over the world trying to figure out what life is like on a daily basis. The discipline of anthropology has been around for a couple hundred of years right now, but right now is the most exciting time in our discipline. One of the reasons why that is because historically we've studied remote areas and sort of exotic locations. That's the difference of the history of sociology and anthropology. Sociology was born in the cities. Anthropology was born in the countryside, in the rural and remote locations. Now in the 21st century, the tools of our discipline, which I'll talk to you a little bit about in a few moments, are used to study right here at home, in cities and in rural communities and in suburbs. And so there's so much exciting work going on specifically within cultural anthropology. The last of the fields is somewhat of a recent addition as a 5th field, and that is applied anthropology. And what you all will be doing this semester, creating service learning projects, in some ways reflects the principles of applied anthropology, which is how do we use the materials that we have learned and gained, the perspectives that we've gained to solve problems for people in the real world. And all encompassed together, that is what anthropology is about. It's a holistic discipline of man. The whole idea with anthropology is, if I want to understand something about you, probably I need to understand about you in totality. So I'm not just what the ideas are in my brain. I'm not just a makeup of my culture. I'm a physical being. I speak a language. I have ideas in my head. There's something happening to my body. I have a history of the people that I've been around and been exposed to. And when we look at all that together, we come up with a very powerful portrait of how people live their everyday lives. Now let's talk a little more about cultural anthropology and how the methods that we use make us really unique from a lot of the other disciplines that exist and how we learn about human behavior. Cultural anthropology has a basic tenet, which is to understand people, you need to sort of do the proverbial walk a mile in their shoes. That means that if you want to really understand who people are, you have to be with them. You have to spend time with them. You have to do the things they do so you get the full embodied experience. This is different, again, not to pick on any other disciplines, but this is just what we have to contribute than to say giving out a survey or to just doing an interview. The idea with cultural anthropology and our method is that we spend time. We spend quality time. We typically call this method the ethnographic method. And the things that we produce as a result of this ethnographic method are called ethnographies. So Raised Up Down Yonder is an ethnography or a portrait of the lives of rural African American youth at a particular point in time. It's like a snapshot in history. And this particular point in time was from 2003 into 2004. What does the ethnographic method entail? These are some things that you'll read in the introduction, but just to give you a little bit of it in my own words, the centerpiece of the ethnographic method is participant observation. You're going to place, you want to learn about the people, you are observing and making observations about what they do, but you're also participating while you're observing. Because when you participate in things, it helps you to think through them in a different way than when you're just observing from the outside. So that is the foundational method of cultural anthropology. Now, the other interesting thing about that is that when we do our participant observation, we also have to think about what is our responsibility for how we report our results. How long do we stay in the field? Typically, an anthropologist stays in the field at least a year for the first part of a research project. Many anthropologists continually travel to a same part of the world or the same community and study it from different angles or different points of view over many years. But usually there's at least a year foundational point to sort of get with the rhythm of life, see what the seasons are like, what are the holidays. For me, the school year is central to how young people live their lives. So it was really important for me to be there for one full school year and a summer. And then I also wound up staying for another half of a school year until December. Once we do our research, we go through an intense process of coding and analyzing. I should say before we go into the field, there's a whole stage of literature review, which I'm sure you would assume, where you read everything possible about that topic to hone in on a set of research questions that you want to do. And then you go about the business of getting permissions from community members and any organizations that you would be observing or working with. But then once you leave the field, what do you deal with all this data? And this is the big difficult thing of writing up your first ethnography. You leave with hundreds of pages, sometimes thousands, of what we call field notes, which are the notes that you keep while you're in the field that tell you about what it is that you experienced in that day, how you interpret what you experienced, and you just write down with as much detail every single thing you can remember, from conversations to people's names to lighting, mood, smell, sounds. It's a full sensory experience. Try to document as much of that every day, and you also collect a lot of material documents. And when you come back, you have to sit all of that out and code that data. Used to be done by hand. Now very often coding is done through softwares and programs. During the time that I was in the field, I actually coded a lot of my data by hand. I'm kind of an old school person, so I printed a lot of my field notes that had been typed. I had a lot of written notes as well, and it was for me making highlights, notes, pile sorting, and figuring out what are the themes, what do I remember, what are the photographs that I took as well, and making sure all of that told a unified story. And then the last part of it is figuring out how do I write up ethically what I observed so that it is representative of what I really saw, what I really experienced. Sharing it with members of the community to say, do you think this thing that I wrote or saw is an accurate portrayal of your community or your culture or your way of life? And that was the full stage or the full series of events that I went through as I started to create this world of Down Yonder. Now I'm so excited that it's a world that's been created, and when you create something and it goes into the atmosphere, you don't know whether people will receive it well or how they'll receive it. All you can do is do your best to portray reality in the most accurate way as possible. I've gotten great feedback from people. Until Professor Poole reached out for me, I mostly had feedback from people who were honestly from the North or from universities on the East Coast or other places that are very removed from the culture of Down Yonder. when Professor Poole reached out to me, this is the first time I got feedback from someone who didn't already know me from the project, who was reading this as an Alabama resident and as someone who was familiar with the kinds of black belt communities that I describe in the book. And so it's very gratifying for me to think that your perspectives may be in part shaped by the ideas presented in the book. A few words in particular about how I chose my research questions and also the ethics that are involved in anthropology despite all the different fields. I'm not going to do too much talking about the actual content of the book because you're going to get to read it and you're going to get to ask me questions, and I want to know what you want to know. But in terms of choosing a topic, one of the hallmarks of the anthropological method is that we tend to be inductive, in our reasoning. What does that mean? It means we allow the data that we record, which is for us mostly observations and experiences, to guide our research questions. Usually before an anthropologist goes into the field, if they're doing a grant application or some sort of proposal, you have to kind of come up with a general sense of these are my guiding questions based on the literature. But nothing compares to when you step foot in that community for the first time. And from that point on, your perspectives are shaped and shifted so many different times. And for me in Down Yonder, that's exactly what happened. I initially went into the field thinking, I'm going to go to this rural location and figure out how young people are interacting with hip hop culture and the ideas of hip hop that are flowing. At that time, they were flowing really from the East and West Coast south. And what do they make of this? And how does this impact their everyday life and their daily lives? And full disclosure, this was pretty much my own fascination. This didn't really have anything to do with that particular location, only in so much as it was rural, but it was really about my own interest in what we call translocal images and how they change when they find root in a new location. When I got down there and I spent time and I had to build rapport, which is what we call when you spend time and get to know people so they trust you. And I found key informants, which were those few people that I could always go to with my observations to sort of check on and find out if I was sort of going in the right path. Once I did that, I started to realize my research questions were kind of drab, actually, and didn't reflect the full complexity, excitement, and engagement with what was actually happening in the community I was studying. So I scrapped that as my research question, and I started, as anthropologists do, inductively to say, I'm here now, what's happening? How can this research be impactful and meaningful to the larger anthropological community and other communities? What would the people here want me to represent, especially young people, about their lives when so often they don't have their own voice to be heard? And what I found and what I thought was, you know what? It really isn't about hip hop, although I do keep that in one chapter because I still thought it was interesting. It really is about what is the meaningful part of the everyday lives for the young people here. And you'll see what I found, but I really think it was shaped them to be more like everybody else in the world than different. And I think one of the values of ethnography in general is that it allows us to connect with people, to see not only the differences and the surface of culture, but the deep similarities that we share. And I think when we connect with each other on that level of the deep similarities, it can break down so many barriers of race and gender and sexuality and culture and religious background, because you realize at the end of the day, for young people or old people, people are concerned about the people they love. Will they be able to support themselves in the future? Are the institutions that they've poured their lives into going to be around to support them? Their spirituality, how is that developing and growing? And these are the questions that I really wound up honing in and focusing on. And I can't wait to hear what you think about what I found. The last thing I'll talk about is our ethical obligations in anthropology. Because we are a social science / humanities discipline that deals very, very intensely with human beings, we have a code of ethics that guides our behavior because we have to protect the people that we are going to study. There are 7 tenets that go under the American Anthropological Association Code of Ethics that guides our behavior. Even though it says American Anthropological Association, it's the largest body of anthropologists all over the world. So this is kind of the gold standard for what we are supposed to do as we conduct research as professional anthropologists. And hopefully by going through these briefly, it gives you a little bit of a sense of what were the things I had to keep in mind as I was not only researching but also writing up my results. The first one is do no harm. We pledge not to do harm to the people that we're studying, first and foremost, to the discipline of anthropology through any unscrupulous behavior, and also thirdly to ourselves. Our job is not to be Indiana Jones. It's not to die in the field. Our job is to actually protect ourselves as well as the communities that we study. There have been so many historical instances of researchers who haven't followed these codes of ethics from the Tuskegee experiment down, that it is really important that when we're thinking about what we're going to study and how we're going to present our findings, that we protect the people that we are studying. The second is that we have to be open and honest regarding our research. As an anthropologist, I cannot come into the community and say, I'm just moving here, and I'm disguising myself. That's journalism, which is different. That's not anthropology. We have to disclose to the people that are there why exactly it is that we're there, and we can't say we're studying literacy rates if we're really studying sexuality, because we don't want people to know. No, we have to disclose the full reason why we're in the field. Third, we have to obtain informed consent. This happens in two ways. One is verbal consent. So there were a lot of people that I interacted with who I didn't do formal sit-down interviews with, who knew I was in the field, and I got verbal consent. Anytime I sat down for an interview with someone and put something in writing, I had to obtain informed consent. I also did something that you may read about in the last chapter called a hip-hop viewing party, where I got some members of the senior class together and we sat down and watched music videos, and I just wanted to get their feedback on what they were seeing and what they thought about it, but I had to get informed consent. And informed consent says, what are the risks involved in the study? What is going to happen to the data once it's collected? You guarantee anonymity to the people that you're studying as well. One of the common practices in anthropology is that we give pseudonyms to major names of people and places. So you will not find Hamilton, Alabama. It is near enough for you to know that you could get to it, but you're not going to find it by looking up Hamilton. That is actually a pseudonym. Likewise with all the main characters, Sabrina and this one and that one, those are all pseudonyms for people who have different actual names. The fourth is to weigh competing obligations. So sometimes in your effort to do no harm to the people you're studying, but also do no harm to the discipline, there may be some gray areas. And we pledge to do our best to take into account all of the various stakeholders and make sure that we are coming up with a reasoned, balanced, and fair ethical outcome. Number 5, we have to make our results widely and publicly accessible. So anthropologists do not engage in clandestine research for governments or militaries. It is a common practice in anthropology now that before you release your report widely, you share it with members of the community to get their feedback and let them know that how you see yourself is as important as how I see you as an outsider. And we need to come to sort of some corroboration of those two sides. Number 6 is that we also pledge to protect and preserve our records so that someone can't come in and steal our records, because obviously my original documents are not in pseudonyms. So those things are locked up and kept in a very safe location. And then lastly, and most importantly, we have to maintain respectful and ethical professional relationships of all kinds. That means I'm not abusive to anyone in the field. I'm not sleeping around with anybody in the field. It means that when I am representing myself as an anthropologist, I have to do so with dignity, decorum, respect, appropriate behavior, and all of those kinds of things. That sums up my introduction for what anthropology is all about, how I got down to Down Yonder and developed some of the questions, and I can't wait for you to meet the characters of Down Yonder and find out what you learn about them, but also what you learn about yourself through them.